I like for the start of these things to make me sound like a real announcer. So welcome everybody. Oh, hell with it. Let's just get started. Udacity and Grow with Google. And today we're going to talk about constraint layout, and our guest mentor is Vera Kern, who will first introduce herself and then tell us everything in the world about constraint layout. Vera, go for it.
We'll see about that.
Everything in the world.
Hi guys, my name is Vera. I have built Android apps for 8 years now. The first app that I worked on professionally was on the market when Android market opened, which was a big deal, or like just something I have never witnessed. The App Store, I didn't, somehow does that pass by me. But so I've done this for a while. I've seen the world before constraint layout, and we will talk about that too. And so I had a little bit of trouble preparing this because I don't know what you guys have been taught, and I don't know why you guys wanted to talk on constraint layout. So I'm
sure that people will not hesitate to ask you questions and
that's
let you know as you go along.
We're going to do a very quick, just overview over layout so that we're all in the same space. I'll talk a little bit about how to break down layouts, because I feel like I saw that the exercise that was given was very and here you put this and here you put that. Like in real life, you're getting a plain image and you have to figure that out yourself, which sometimes people are a little stumped about. I want to introduce a tool for communication with designers real quick. And then I have some ideas in which direction we could go. And I'm also totally happy to open this up outside of even layouts, like anything about XML in Android we can talk about if you guys have questions. And so we can just as a group decide where we want to take it, and we'll do some coding together. Maybe we'll do some research together, because I've done this for a long time, but that doesn't mean I know everything. No developer knows everything, and I rely heavily on Google and the Android developer websites to just look things up and try them out and see how they work and learn. And I think that's actually one of the qualifications of a good engineer, just know how to find your solutions that you need.
Now I'm seeing some questions or at least one question on the chat window. I don't know if
what is the
have
default?
that open?
The default of what? Oh, for layouts?
Yeah, so now when you create a project, it always defaults to constraint, and yeah, why is that so?
Yeah, so how about I'm going to start and do a really quick introduction of layouts, and I think that will be, we will talk about that as well, and then we can do a follow-up if it didn't get answered. Is that okay?
Great.
Awesome. So I'm going to share my screen.
Yes, please.
I guess what is expected. It's not very pretty, but so I'm going to start with just a general overview of the classes. A layout is considered a view group, which basically just means it's a view that can have children. And there are a bunch of layouts in this group, but there's a lot of other views in that group as well. We're not going to talk about them. Like a recycler view is a view group too, for example. And when I started out, there was a linear layout, a relative layout, and a frame layout. And that's all you had to work with for the majority of your layouts. And then in 2016 at Google I/O, they introduced constraint layout, and I was actually there, and it was an alpha, and it was people were like, what is this? This is auto layout on iOS. This is weird. Do we want this? And we could pretty quickly find cases that you couldn't solve with constraint layout. But when I now, in retrospective, did some research, when it came out, people wrote about it and were a little bit hesitant around it. And now there is not even a question around, should I use constraint layout, or is constraint layout better, or anything. It's just it is now the default when you create a layout. And I wouldn't disregard the other layouts. I think they are still valid for certain use cases. I also, in terms of performance, constraint layout is the best, and we can talk about why that is. But depending on the simplicity of your screen, it might not make a huge difference. So I'm just quickly going to go over the three other ones. A frame layout is literally basically a box, and you should rarely put more than one image, one view in there. It's usually used as a placeholder. It has very little layout attributes, like you can't really position things in relation to each other or anything. It's just meant to be a placeholder. And then there's a relative layout that is also a box, but the children can have positions in relation to the parent or in relation to their siblings. And you can center in it horizontally and vertically. So it gets us somewhere, but you can't do everything in it. One thing, for example, that relative layout does not support in any way is something like space distribution by ratios, like cut it in half or something like that. That is not possible. And it's rather performance heavy because the children can have relations to each other. The rendering machine often has to go over the whole layout twice to figure out where each item should be positioned. So if you get into a deep hierarchy with relative layouts, that can really hit your performance. And there's a linear layout, which is something like a table, but you can only either have rows or only columns. And it's called, there are two orientations, they're called horizontal and vertical. The siblings can't overlap in this one. So what you put in one of if a view is the first child and another view is the second child, they can have no relation to each other. You can, inside of each of these boxes, in a way, you can center or left and right align. But other than that, there isn't much you can do. So often enough, you would put a relative layout as the child of a linear layout and then do more stuff in there. But one very nice thing that linear layout supports are weights, and we're going to go over this a little bit more detail on the next slide, which was pretty much for the longest time the only way you could do any kind of percentage distribution or evenly distributed views around over the screen. It does have a better performance than relative layout unless you use weights, because then it also has to go over the layout multiple times to figure out how to lay out everything. So just because I didn't know if this was covered at all, and it was like something I used a lot, at least with linear layouts, are weights. So you could say something like you had three children, and you could say the first two have the weight 1 and the last has the weight 2, and then the system would basically sum up those to 4, and then each child would get its share of the width that is available. And that was just really helpful when you wanted to do things like the exercise that you guys had, where there's 3 values across the screen and you want to like center the middle one and then have the same amount of space around the other ones. That wasn't possible with a relative layout. So now then they introduced constraint layout, and you can do pretty much, you can definitely do more than you could with any of the other layouts. And the biggest advantage of constraint layout is that you're not creating a hierarchy of layouts. We can go into that later. Before constraint layout, you would do a lot of a relative layout would be a child of a linear layout, and inside that relative layout, you might have another linear layout with a different orientation, for example. And that just made complex screens really slow, especially then if you wanted to add animations and stuff like that. The other problem is that in Android, children that don't have the same parent can't interact with each other. So if I had a child of a linear layout and a child that was in some other relative layout, I could not align those in any way with each other. I had to find other ways to like come up with the positioning I wanted. Because constraint layout is basically one big layout, and you can then lay out every child with each other. It gives you a lot more options to share, to use every screen element to align other screen elements. and if you look at it, so I've done a lot of iOS development as well, and it's pretty close to what auto layout on iOS offers you to do. And I would say that picking this for the default is was a good decision by Google. It will make the screen generally faster. I think it is also more natural for people to think about it that way, which we will go over by the example that this is what I was given that you guys implemented for constraint layout. Is that correct? Does this look familiar to people?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So I basically I took the solution that I was given. I just ran it on my phone and looked at the screen. I didn't even look at the layout, and then I did something that I would usually do in my head. I tried to visualize it a little bit, but I tried to break it up the way I would have broken this one screen up before there was a constraint layout. I would look for patterns like, oh, there are a lot of things that are stacked on top of each other. This looks like a linear layout to me. And then the middle one would show, but within that linear layout, there are other elements that need a different kind of layout. For example, there are 2 smaller stacks that are next to each other, and then there are the 3 big numbers that kind of look like a table. And then, of course, that part with the little airplane that shows you from where, how do you say it? I don't know. Your route. It shows you your route. And like the way the stuff is aligned doesn't immediately like scream a pattern, but once you take it apart a little bit, it's a horizontal linear layout with 3 boxes, and then the middle box is another linear layout. And so this shows how you would create a hierarchy because you couldn't align these things otherwise. For constraint layout, because now we can basically work a little bit more like a designer would think about it, who just can move everything around their artboard as they like. And what I did a lot in my job was explain to designers that before constraint layouts, that I can't work like that. So that they need to think in these boxes. But once constraint layout came out, that got a lot easier. But so now designers can export their designs into a tool called Zeppelin, which I highly recommend if you ever work with a designer. And I'm just going to give you a quick overview. Can you guys see this?
I'm sorry, say that again. Code.
It's called Zeppelin.
Zeppelin?
Zeppelin.
Zeppelin, okay.
Like the big thing that flies.
Yep, okay.
And their URL is zeppelin.io. And so the designers can import or export their designs into this tool. And then you as a developer can log in here and you can click on any item and you can see which font size it is and which color code you need. And it even gives you a little blob so you don't have to write all the code. It's just really helpful for communicating. And especially because you can also see spacing, which I always find very hard to pick up. So if you click on an element and then you hover over another, you can see how this is aligned, how they are aligned to each other. I don't know how much you guys went into like pixel perfect screens or any of that, or if that is interesting. But generally, I really recommend this tool. So I mean, this is layouts in the broadest sense. You guys, I don't know if you guys even did any of the other layouts in your course, or if you only covered constraint layout. So something I did was I actually rebuilt the screen only using linear layouts, and then I tried doing only relative layouts, which you couldn't do that. But if that's something you guys would like to see, or at least you could see something like, you can see how deep the hierarchy goes. Here I just closed all of the end children, but this is only linear layouts. And then this would be only relative layouts. I didn't close the children here, but in the preview, I don't know if you can pick up, but there's a few things that are not as right. So we can go over something like that. Let me find my browser again. Oops. But generally, I had a few ideas. We can do random questions regarding UI coding for Android. If that's what you guys need, I'm happy to do that, and I will try my best to answer it. We can rebuild this UI with any restrictions or not restrictions you guys would want. We could do a code review of the solution I was given, and we can see what I think was good or what was not so good about it. We can talk about working with designers, if that's something you have trouble with. We can build, if you have a screen and you're like, I want to know how you would build that screen, we can do that. And we can talk about best practices for UI code, what to keep an eye out, what to avoid, what should you do, just generally, not just layouts, but or if there's another idea you guys have, I am happy to do that as well.
Hello?
I don't know what you guys learned and what not.
I think everybody learns different things.
We can also just go over this and talk about each of the...
Yeah, I have a few questions, but I'd like to open it up and see what everyone else is thinking, what's on everybody's mind.
I'm also not sure.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I want to ask you some question regarding the, so what about instead of using XML, put everything into code?
That's a good question.
Like for example, let's say like there is this enhancement that I need to do for a specific type of phone, right? Let's say like it's a 5X and it's just specific for that kind of phone. And I, instead of using an XML, I go and start doing into the code.
Like you have like a small element on a screen that only shows up for the 5X, is that? Or is it a full screen that is only for the 5X?
No, so some small element that is just to be for the 5X.
Okay.
And let's say, okay, I think for that case, well, I'm thinking, I don't know if it's okay. Instead of doing it on XML, trying to do it everything into code, have you ever tried, instead of doing XML, going direct and trying to do it in code? And
by code, you mean the Java code?
Yeah, Java code. Like for example, like view group.
New text view, blah blah blah, font color. Yeah, you can technically write all of this in Java code, which is pretty much what you do on the iOS side. If you don't use storyboards in iOS, you're writing all your layouts in code, and I've done that. And on iOS, it is the better option. The storyboards have problems. I would very much try to avoid that on Android as much as you can. The best way would be to encapsulate that. If it's just more than one view, encapsulate it in like a relative layout or a linear layout. And in your code, you would reference that layout, and then depending on which phone you run on, you would just say hide or show, like set that view to gone or to visible. You want to separate your UI code as much as possible. It also offers you all these advantages that you have with the preview on the side of the editor. So you can toggle like, oh, what would it look on a 5X? What would it look like on a non-5X? Things like, oh, the text color has to change based on some condition. Yeah, you can do that in code. But creating whole views, I would try to avoid. Also, in terms of teamwork, for someone you work with who will look at that code maybe later or even like just a day or two later, might not know that you put that there. And might look at the layout and be like, I don't understand, where's that thing for the 5X? Or like, why am I seeing something else on my phone? Because this person happens to run it on a 5X. So I would try to steer away from it. Besides it being really tedious, I find, like, I don't want to write new text view, blah, 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 blah. Like that blows up your Java code to something that it shouldn't be.
Vera, let me, maybe you should stop screen sharing, and that way we can see you when you're answering questions, and we can get back to the screen sharing if we need to. And
how do
you do that? Yeah, I can figure it out.
That's a good question.
Oh, stop share. I got it.
Okay, good. All right. So connected with that, I have a question, which is, what about using the designer? Is that commonly done?
So I have never done it, because when I started writing for Android, there was no such thing, or what was there was so terrible that it was like you would have to correct it all the time. And maybe that's why I haven't never gotten used to it. I tried now that they revamped it with the constraint layout, and I tried it out, and it's a lot better. But I think I would use it only if I'm trying to think, I can't think of how to do a certain thing, and I'm trying to move my item and then see what the layouter would give me for a solution, and then fine tune it to whatever I want. When I tried it recently, for example, I moved a button, and what it gave me was a hard X and Y positioning for the button, which should really not be the case. That's something you want to avoid in any layout. You want to have as little hard-coded numbers as possible. So I wouldn't trust it as writing good code.
What about using the designer?
Or for getting started?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, that's what I would think of as using the designer to rough out the outline first, and then going in and digging into the XML in order to.
And then it also depends, of course, for example, we had strict coding styles, so attributes had to be in a certain order and whatnot. Before you send it to code review, you have to go over the code anyways. I would never trust that just as is, but if you know what you're doing and you just want to put something together and then go over it, that's totally fine. I think that just depends on what your preferences are. I personally have never done that.
So, what other questions do we have for Vera? Which of the routes should we take in order to? I have my own preferences, but I'd like to hear from everybody else.
I like what you guys are doing. So, I'm absorbing and able to go with whatever. I'm trying to prepare a question or two now, but I've got to look at some of the lessons to remember what my questions exactly are about.
All right.
Constraint layouts.
All right. I'm wondering, because I was told that this was it was asked to do a talk about constraint layout. I'm wondering, were there particular problems building this part of the?
We're not that well organized. I guess one of the things that I'm interested in is seeing you think out a very simple constraint layout on the fly and telling us what's on your mind as you do it. Is that everybody else?
That sounds good to me.
That sounds good?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Something in action on it.
Do you guys want me to do the boarding pass one, or should we pick some other screen?
Let's pick something simpler. If we just take something and say, well, here's a very simple layout. Here's how I would think it over in terms of constraint layouts. Start small, and then if we want, we can add to it.
I'm just looking at something we could build.
So I did have a quick question specifically about Zeppelin. What does Zeppelin offer that the XML preview designer thing we were talking about doesn't? Is it just more user-friendly to graphic designers? Or?
It solves a different problem. It solves the problem your designer gives you a plain PNG, for example, and you are supposed to implement this, versus in Zeppelin you can find out more about each of the elements on the screen, like colors and sizes and spacing.
So Zeppelin can parse a regular image file and turn it into what it thinks is a decent
it's not a regular image file. It has to come from either Photoshop or Sketch, where these things are actually defined.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay, that's good to know.
So it's like if you work with someone who works in, or if you work with a visual, if you make a visual first in like a in a photo editor or like a sketch, app sketch, this basically like translates it. It's not like meant that you can copy everything out of it. Like you can't do that, but your designer doesn't have to make you little annotations. This color is blah, blah, blah. And this is the font size, blah, blah, blah. They can just put it in there. And, like, cool. I didn't know how to do it, but like it can even export vector graphics and stuff, but I don't know how to make a vector graphic in Sketch.
Okay. So I got lots of positives on the idea of you creating a simple layout for us, and
that's awesome. I'm
thinking out loud about constraint layouts for it. So let's do that.
Yeah. Do you guys like? Should we pick an image and we rebuild the image, or should we just say we want to have X, Y, Z?
Just say you want to have whatever's easiest for you.
Now I have to be creative, guys. Goodness.
What did you say? Oh, I'm sorry.
All right. Anybody who's got noise going on in the background, if you could mute your speaker.
Hello.
Your microphone.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's me again. I have other question.
Please.
This constraint layout, for example, let's say that I'm designing a layout that it's gonna be for Arabic phone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I have one question. Like, if I make it from right to left, my design, like at the moment that the user convert the phone, like into right to left, it will automatically convert for the user, or do I need to make some changes?
So generally the system supports these changes, and that is why, for example, you might have noticed when you write.
Okay, can I just interrupt? We've got a lot of noise in the background. If you're not speaking, could you please mute yourself? I can automatically mute anybody, but I don't want to go ahead and do that because then I'll be fiddling around with the Zoom UI. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
So I have a quick question about performance.
Sorry.
So,
can we finish the one?
Yeah, let's finish the question.
Right. So if you might have noticed that you can assign something like margin right, but you can also assign it as margin end. Not for a long time, but at first there was only left and right, and then they understood that other countries write the other way, and so they introduced they introduced start, which is left, and right, end, which is right. And so sometimes you have to, depending on which version you're supporting, you have to write both out. So which means that you can write a layout, and if the phone is set to, for example, Arabic, the whole layout will flip so that it is the other way around. I can. There is a whole. There must be. If you Google RTL support, that is what you want to look for, and there are very good articles around how to make sure that everything turns. And you can also tell by layout, like this one supports left to right, right to left, and not. But the system generally supports it, and you can write your layouts in a dynamic way so that they, depending on which language is currently set, they adjust to that. Does that help, or do you want to go more into detail?
No, that helps. Thank you.
Awesome. So,
and someone else got a question before we?
The guy with the dots on the wall.
Yeah, I did. So if my layout only has 3 or maybe 5 views, does constraint layout have any significant performance increase rather than using like a relative layout?
No. So I rebuilt that, even that boarding pass screen, which is not that complex, but obviously more than 3 to 5 views. And I ran the GPU, goodness, I'm missing my words today. Sorry, guys.
That's what we're all doing today.
Profiler, maybe?
There's a GPU profiler that you can run on a device. And I tried it for the solution that I was given. I tried it for only linear layouts. I tried it for only relative layouts. And there was barely any difference. This matters more if you get more complicated, if there's more moving parts, if you're rendering bigger images, stuff like that. So if you're uncomfortable with constraint layout, you don't have to do it. Or like, unless you have it's like a problem, you can use the other ones, it's totally fine. They're not terrible. I mean, if you think about it, they were available when Android was introduced, and the phones that were available back then, I don't know if you guys ever saw a G1 or the phones that came out there, they were terrible.
Not old enough.
And they rendered that stuff, and we did very complicated screens on them. It's like, this is better, and they need to look out for the future, but they will render your screens will render perfectly fine with linear and relative layouts.
Okay.
Other questions before we get Vera to create a layout for us?
I just have a quick one. So on that same line, is there a reason to not use a constraint layout for simple layouts, or can we just kind of use that layout for everything?
So what I have found writing constraint layouts is that you have less of a hierarchy, but every element on your screen has a lot more attributes, because you have to define all this, like align to the left, align to the right, align to that element, centered to X element. Whereas for like styling, I would often, because it's often repetitive, I would put it in a style, and I could have like very few elements on a very few element, because like, for example, a linear layout, just stacks them on top of each other, for example. I don't have to express that in any way. So I found that it makes the code a little bit more verbose, especially then if you want to support the left and right and start and end. So then you have to duplicate all of these. So like, for example, if you look at the boarding pass screen, I would probably, like, there's just so many things that are stacked vertically here. I think it makes perfect sense to use a linear layout with an orientation vertical, simply to avoid to always write, this one is below this, this one is below this, this one is below this. Like, I find that annoying, to be honest. I see it as a case for things that are more randomly aligned with each other, or if I would have to go really deep into a hierarchy. But if you have something that is almost like a list, I think a linear layout is a very valid choice. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome.
Would you like to create a layout for us?
Sure, I'll.
Your choice. Start with something simple.
My main problem is coming up with like, what are we gonna build? But I'm gonna start sharing my screen.
Something simple.
Well, yeah, I get that. Okay. Oops. You guys can see the.
I can.
Okay. So I'm just gonna create a new
Yes,
file.
we can too.
Oops. I'll just give it like a weird name. And it always starts with this, see, and my first reaction is always to click on text. And then because I'm OCD, every attribute has to be in its own line. Sorry, guys, you will see me do a lot of that stuff. So what we get is the constraint layout. I'm gonna do just that now. And then I'm gonna, how about we write a screen that shows me information about a movie? So we can put an image at the top, and then we can have a title and stuff like that. Should we do that?
Sounds good.
Awesome. Okay, the image, because I have to find one, we'll do in a little bit, but for now I'm just gonna write a text view. This thing always comes up for me, I don't know how to remove it. One thing that I found in constraint layout is you shouldn't use match parent within the layout. It is better to use a zero width, and then you anchor the layout to the parent on both sides. See, and this is what I mean with the redundancy. I now have to write, oops, sorry, I can't spell parent apparently. You can see that it's been stretched now. And if I want to do this really right, I would have to write end to end of parent and start to start of parent. Oops, sorry, my computer is slow being slow.
And what advantage does this have over using match parent?
So constraint layout has problems with match parents in it, because it is built to relate objects to each other. I have found that in some cases, for example, if you say match parent, actually I can try to recreate that. Let's make it match parent. Oops. And I'll put another text view here. And so one thing that is good practice, and I'm sure you guys have learned this, is to use the tools. Oops, the tools tag. Is that, did you guys cover that? Yeah, right?
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, okay. So what this does is I can put a text here like hello, and it will show up in my preview. But when I run the app in a simulator or on the phone, this text will be disregarded, and I have to set something from code or however I want to use this text view. But it's like so that you can have your preview and see what your screen would look like. And it is very powerful. You can use a lot of attributes with it. We can go into that as well. Now we're gonna say goodbye. And so now I made it match parent, and now I'm gonna say that the second one is gonna be aligned. The start is gonna be aligned to the end of, oh, I haven't given it. You also need way more IDs in constraint layout, which I often just don't give IDs in other layouts because I don't need them. So we have one text field is called hello, and it's we said it's match parent, so we would remove all of these. And then we have our goodbye, and actually we can make that rep content. But this is basically what we would get right now. And it kind of makes no sense. Like this, the hello is match parent, and then this this goodbye is supposed to be at the, like it's supposed to have its left edge on the end of the edge of hello, but it's not really what we're seeing in the preview here. So whatever, like, I wouldn't even try to understand what is happening here. Keep in mind you want to keep this at 0 and then just stretch the whole thing. And then you get what you actually want. And then this will also make you realize, oh, if I want to have another view in the same line, I have to adjust these attributes so that they're next to each other, for example. But that was something I had to learn because I'm like, before there was only match content or match parent or rep content, and that would, if you wanted something to stretch across the screen, it was one line. Now I have 4 lines to write. Obviously, you could put things like that in a style. I don't know how much styles were covered, but then you have that in different combinations with other styles, and I feel like that could get really tricky to read and to maintain as a code base as well. So I'm going to rename this to title. And what is a movie out there right now? I'm completely I'm just going to go with a
Lady Bird.
Lady
Bird.
That's a good idea. So we have our title. It's a title, so we probably want to make it a little bigger. I recommend to always use SPs instead of DP for font size. If that hasn't been covered, I'm happy to talk about it. For font size, that's really what you want to go with. And because I'm lazy, I do a lot of copy pasting, so I'm just going to do this. And what is our second, the director maybe? Well, now you have to keep up the knowledge because I don't know who directed.
That was Greta Gerwig.
Wow.
I
And
just happen to know.
I'm impressed.
Thank you.
So now they're on top of each other because so far I've only told this view to stretch from all the way to the left to all the way to the right, but I haven't told it where it would be in the vertical. So we would have to say that top to bottom of title, and then they are below each other. So now we have two things that are below one another. Maybe we want to put a rating in the right corner. So I would use a text view, call it rating. Oh, I tried to scroll, but it's just Zoom that is on top of it. And it's going to have like an 8.5, I would say. I've not seen the movie. And this time we would say that we want the right side to the parent, but we don't want it to stretch all across the screen. And you guys just saw how it contracted and moved over, to make this bigger, to the right side. And maybe overall, everything is now pretty much edged on the sides of the screen.
So what I want to do for a moment is take a look at the code that you've written and make sure that I am convinced that the code that you've written corresponds to the
layout
that I see in the design view. And I just want to take a minute to do that. Maybe it's good for everybody else.
Sure. Should I go over it again? Should we talk through it?
I'm not sure. What does everybody else think? I just want to stare at it for a second here.
You're free to stare at it.
Yeah. We've got parent.
Maybe the director and rating would be nice to review again.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So maybe one thing that hasn't been mentioned is the default is always the upper left corner. If you don't write anything, things will be in the upper left corner. And if you want them there, you don't have to write anything pretty much. Unless you say something, I want to also have it on the other edge, then you need to be explicit that you want it on both edges so it stretches across. But generally, upper left corner is your default position of a view. That's why they all show up there when I just create them without any layout constraints around them. And so the director is, these 4 lines are just there so that the text view stretches from one side of the screen to the other side of the screen. And you can see like the text view actually overlaps with the rating right now. So we would have to think about what we want to do about it, or if we have to do something about it. For example, if it was, could the director name be so long that it could ever reach the rating, then you want to write it in a way where you ensure that then it, for example, breaks into a new line or something. But we can get into that. But for now, like, these 4 lines are literally just there to stretch it across the screen. And then the next line, this one, says, the top of my view, the top edge of my text view, should be aligned to the bottom view of the view that is called title, which is the ladybird text view, right? So that's why it moved below it. And then this is just text size and the text in there. And then for the rating, these 2 lines move the view all the way over to the right. And the next one, the constraint top to bottom of, again, moves it below the title. And actually something we could do here is this should be rep content again, because we just want it to be as big as the content that's in it. Was that convincing?
I'm convinced, but I guess I'd also like to see now what happens to keep the Greta Gerwig from overlapping the 8.5.
Okay, how about we make...
I concur.
So, right? Oh, see, our problem is that it's 2 words and it breaks conveniently for us right now. That always tricks you. I'm like, oh, everything's all right, and it's not. We're gonna see if I'm gonna switch it to a different simulator if we can see the problem. Here it's a little bit visible. That's better. We won't, I can also just.
Maybe if we have a director with an extremely long first name.
Yeah, I'm just gonna add some e's to her name.
Yes, now we've got some problems.
Yes, so this is the problem we want to solve, right?
Yep.
Let me quickly move this out of the way. So the solution, let's say the solution is we just break we break the director view earlier, so it has like some space from the right, so it doesn't run into the rating. The first thing that I think a lot of people would think about is they would just say, oh, so it needs some spacing on that side. Let's give it a margin on the right. Let's say 30, right? Problem solved. Awesome. Well, this is, if I would see that in code review, that wouldn't go into the code base. One of the main issues on Android, especially with UI coding, is that there are so many different devices out there, and you just saw, like, I just went through a bunch of them, and like the layout always changed a little bit. So that 30 might work nicely in this specific case, but on another phone, it might look really awkward. So we want to build it in a dynamic way. So please don't do that. Margins are never there to move views out of each other's ways. You have to do that within views. So we want the director to, I'm terrible with left and right. This is why this is actually really sometimes difficult.
You can take your time thinking about it. I'm terrible about it too. I sympathize.
So we want it to start at the left, but the right end of it should not go all the way to the parent. It should go all the way to rating. I hope I got this right. Right would be end of. Nope.
We don't need the plus, right?
It's a little unclear. Generally, the idea is unless, if you're referencing a view that shows up further down in the layout, you need, technically, like clean would be to add the plus, but it usually works without it. But it's like, basically there is a rule, but the thing works regardless of what you do, as long as you always have the plus when you assign the ID, it's okay. So don't overthink it. But the idea is, an ID is introduced once the view is on this, like shows up in your layout, and if you're referencing it above that view, then you would have to basically introduce the ID before. But I have to write this from scratch. So we want the end of the view to the start of rating.
Uh-huh.
There we go.
Very nice.
We want the right of the view to the left. So, rating, right? So now we have space between the two, but they're like right next to each other. If you can see, like their lines overlap. That means if I'm on a phone with a name that happens to go exactly the width, that takes up exactly all that space that it has, then it would look not very nice. So we would probably still want to add a margin here on the right, something like 12. Oh, that was wrong view. So now they have like a little bit of breathing room between each other, and like whatever comes in here will have its space and just grow vertically, and the rating will have space as well. I would say if you're going to add an image to the rating, like a star or a heart, to see, because right now it's just a number, people might not know what it is, and we will go a little bit over doing XML, doing vector graphics. I don't know how much that has been covered, but whoops. Sorry. So this is a website that I really like when I need an icon. I don't know if you guys have known about it, but you can basically just see a bunch of icons here. There's the official Google icons in there and like some other packs. And you can just click on one and it offers you to export it as a PNG, some package, and as a vector drawable. So we're just going to copy that code. And we have an image. It's great. Oops. And we're going to add our image here. It's an icon and it's a star. And there is our star. I don't know what yellow is. Is this? There was yellow. Ta-da! And then we'll go back into our layout. And in the text view, something that I really like about text views is they have an attribute called Drawable, and then there is left, bottom, right, and top. And it means you can add a little drawable to the text view without building like a little layout that keeps them together. So we want to have a drawable on the left. So I'm going to pick that and the star. Oops.
Wow.
And then it shows up next to the text. And if you this is just to understand the what you can do with it. I'm going to make the text really big. You can already see like the text is like the star is centered to the text, but you even have control over that. Like you could say something like, if you use gravity for it, let's say we say gravity top. Nope. I have to do it the other way around. Like let's say the text is really small. So now you can see the text compared to the star is at the top. You can say bottom, then the text is at the bottom, or you can center vertical, and then the text is where it should be. But that's just a very handy way. You don't have to build an extra layout, or you don't have to define this relationship. It's just really quick. Like that was one thing that I saw in the exercise of the boarding pass screen, where they had the SFO and LAX with the boxes around it, and it was two views. And like I wouldn't build it like that. I would always make that part of the text view. Like you can also give a background to a text view. So the box could just be a background. Text views are pretty powerful on Android. I'm just going to make it a little bit.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Could you put the drawable behind the text? So like the start? Okay.
This one is it. So I'm just going to use a color for now. It's literally background. And we pick a color. And then but we can also find an image. We can use an image here. I don't think this with the plane. Awesome, we have the plane. It's a drawable now, and it's the plane. Doesn't look good right now because it makes no sense. But you can see that you could literally have an image button, and if you design this well, it hopefully would look good. But yeah, so text views can have backgrounds, and they can have the side drawables, and then you can also, because you can say something like padding is 10, so this makes in that case no sense, but you have the shape rectangle stroke. If we use that, then you can see how you can, that's something I don't like about constraint layout. It always shows you all these lines and it's hard to see your layout. So now we have that box around the text, and our padding here, like let's say I make it 20, then it just grows around it, right? So I can adjust that as I want. And right now I'm just setting a general padding, but I can also make that padding right and do a different padding on the left, make it 40. right? Like I have a lot of flexibility here. So you already see how the LAX SFO boxes could have built like this. We just have to replace 8.5 by LAX.
Great.
That was, I'm just going to remove a little bit of that stuff because it has nothing to do with movies. What should we do next?
Well, find out if we have any other questions. I understand from a chat window note that there are other sessions starting. So,
Oh, okay.
But are there any, we can go for a bit longer. I don't mind. Are there other questions?
I can't see that chat window, so if anybody's monitoring.
I was gonna say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I did have another question. It was more related to using images. Does Android support scalable vector graphics?
Yes.
As
so
resources?
That little star icon that we used here.
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna go back to it. This is a vector graphic.
Oh, okay.
This is a specific Android way of expressing vector graphics, but there are a lot of plugins that like if you create a vector graphic, for example, in Sketch, there's a plugin to let you convert it into this. There are restrictions. Android XML graphics do not support everything SVG supports. Like, be very careful with gradients and masks. Not a good idea. You always want to have like your shape. But generally these are created, and this is why like I can like put a different color here. Oh, now it went away. Right, I can easily tint them. I can also tint them in code. And you can obviously, like, we can put one in and see it grow, and it obviously is way more beautiful because it's rendered and therefore sharp. So let's add an image view. And now if anybody knows how to not make this show up, I would be embedded.
I have, if you click on an empty space, the blueprint on the blueprint, it will remove lines on the layout view. Is that what you're asking? I'm not sure.
No, there's always like, never mind. There's like a dialogue coming up that I don't like.
Oh.
It's okay.
Yeah, that dialogue pops up for me too.
Whenever I have to assign the width or the height, it says something about it, and I don't care. I know how to use it. So as you see, like I just created an image view, and I said it's 100 by 100, and I put the star in. And if we zoom in, I mean, this is the preview, but it's the same image, and you can easily scale them up and down like that. And we've created pretty complex illustrations with it. Like it's a pretty good system, especially because it lets you use the colors that you have defined in your color file. So I can, instead of writing the hex code here, I can write color, which means you can have a set of icons and they're gray, and you put your color gray in there, and then you decide, I want a different shade of gray. You just change that shade of gray and all your icons have the right color. When that came out, I was delighted. That wasn't the case all the time. I don't know if you guys saw, but in our layout, I got a little underline here. Vector graphics, the compatibility to older versions with vector graphics is a little tricky. There's a compatibility image view that's specific, and then there's a specific sign. For now, I'm not going to go into it, but like, if you use it heavily and you're supporting anything before Lollipop, make sure to really test this on older phones. These crashes are silent and hard to find.
Vera, do you see the chat window? It says, are you talking about the code completion suggestion box?
No, I'm talking about this being underlined.
No, in your earlier, I guess, remark.
No, sorry, I can show this again. Maybe I'm talking about this.
Oh, that one. I've never seen that.
I don't know.
So I found like a small life hack to get around this. So you know how if you type an image right and then you hit enter, then it automatically does image view, and then it automatically generates Android layout with. So while you're in the two quotations, if you just delete one of the quotations and then re-enter it, you won't get the
that makes sense.
pop-up.
I was hoping I could just tell it to not show me that stuff. I don't know. It's new. This is not something that has happened for the longest time. Otherwise, I knew how to get rid of it. So I have to remove this otherwise. Our preview went away. Oh, there's the chat bar. There's way too many elements on my screen at this point.
Everything's going on all at once.
Yeah, I know. It's like, what is it this, that we saw the image? It can't be it. Oh, I clicked on documentation here.
There we go.
There's a lot of buttons on Android Studio. I've actually, sometimes I do usability tests with Google, and I'm always like, you got to redesign Android Studio. It's way too busy. I understand why people like Xcode. It's one big button that you press.
Are there other questions that we can answer? Meaning Vera.
I would like to have one question before I go on to another session. Is that okay?
That's fine.
What?
Okay. So, and it may demonstrate my lack of understanding of constraint layouts, but in school I come from a Java background. So what I'm wondering, so a constraint layout seems to be an object, and then all of the persistent data to it or variables are stored in the resources directory in an XML file. Is that how that's working as a whole?
Well, the hierarchy is more like constraint layout is a class, and it has another parent which is view layout, which is view group, and that has another parent probably. And they have implementations on how to render themselves, and then every child they can have has implementation how to render themselves. So in a way, you can think of it as like a class that has a bunch of fields, like class variables.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess it's a non-visual way to think about it, but I would always think of it as a box, and it has elements in it, and these elements are somehow like positioned to each other. But that's the visual thought about it, obviously.
Right.
And I think when you inflate the layout, don't you get a class hierarchy as in an actual Java class hierarchy from all of the elements that you've described in the attributes and in the other XML files?
Yes, you would get that. But so then, as you know, like Android is open source. You can literally look at the source code and see how all of this is implemented.
Right.
I'm not sure it will help you code constraint layout.
Right.
But if that's something that's interesting to you, and sometimes it is helpful, like, why is this not
helpful for me to think about, it helps me to think about how I'm working with it. So.
Yeah, and like sometimes I also just find it interesting to see how have they implemented something.
Right.
So it's a good repository.
Yeah, I go there all the time. Good idea. Yeah.
And like you can browse it and you can see all the implementations, and there's very little secrecy around it. It's big.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Feel free to ask something else.
Any other questions?
Yes, I have two questions, please.
Mm-hmm.
What tools you recommend for performance testing? And do you recommend using data binding inside the XML to, to update the XML or not?
Yeah. Let's do the first one. Tools. I wanted to show the GPU profiler, but unfortunately you cannot use it on a simulator or emulator. You have to run the app on a real phone, and I wasn't sure how I could show you guys my screen of my phone. But there is a profiler for can probably show you something. Give me 1 second. So it's a tool that lets you see how your screen does in terms of rendering. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this boarding pass app on my phone, and I'm going to run the profiler, and then I'm take a screenshot for you guys to see it. It's in this, and have you guys tested on real phones? Do you know the developer options on phones? Hello?
I've
Yes, yes.
I have.
Okay.
Not too familiar with all the developer options.
Yeah, no, there's a
Just
ton of
general.
them. You should not, there's no need to know all of them. And they are way, like, this is so much right now that oh my, I used it yesterday. You can't search in them, which is also really weird. Maybe if I,
so now you're
I'm
running
on my real phone.
what?
I'm doing things on my real phone.
Right.
And I'm trying to find the option that turns on the profiler for the GPU.
Yeah, this may be a little bit complicated while we're
Okay, but so that is a tool you can use. It's in the developer options, and it literally shows you ongoing how your screen is rendering, and it's color coded, and you can look up the codes online, and it gives you like the line for the 60 milliseconds. So if that hasn't been talked about, like the screen is rendered at a certain rate, and you have, like, the system has 60 milliseconds to render a screen update. And if you're above it, your app's getting janky. So it shows you a line for that. And another thing you can use is the Android profiler down here, but that's CPU, memory, and network. So if you like do a lot of downloads, or like want to see how much network your app consumes, or if you're doing really CPU heavy processes, then you can see that here. Or if you have huge images and you're overloading the memory, that would show up here. But those are, there's way more tools. Like there's a whole, like you can also within the developer settings, you can get a tracer, like that is even more information around your rendering, and like where there might be problems and why it might be slow, and suggestions how to not do it.
There will be forced GPU rendering.
Sorry?
Option. There will be a forced GPU rendering in hardware accelerated rendering. If you go bottom, you can see forced GPU rendering.
Oh, in the profiler?
No, once you go to system, go to developer options. At the bottom, you can see.
On the phone?
Yeah, in the phone.
Yeah. I found the bar, so I can take a screenshot for you guys now. Oh, this is haha. This is what. So here you can see the screen, and so this is the line that you shouldn't be over. And this is when the screen was first rendered, and then it's pretty okay. And then if I start moving it, I will refresh. You can see like ongoing, it's doing pretty okay. But this is how I also I try to figure out if the linear layout versus the relative layout versus the constraint had any bigger impacts. And they were all, in the beginning, they're all intense. That's just how a screen is. And then they're all below the line. This is a pretty neat tool. I wish they had it on the simulator. It'd be nice to not do it on the phone.
maybe next year.
Maybe next year. Sorry, and then you had a second question. What was the second question?
It was about using data binding inside the XML.
Yeah. So before data binding, there was a library called Butterknife, which basically just helped you get rid of all the like find view by ID, because it was annoying to developers. And if that's just your problem, like if you just want to like get rid of a little bit of boilerplate code in your Java classes, just use Butterknife. It's a very decent little library to do that. For data binding, I think it is great. I think it can do amazing things, but I think people can take it too far, and the community has worked really hard being very good at separating logic and UI code, and data binding kind of tempts you to go back into that because it can do so much. Just using it with a data class where it's like, here's my screen, that like my movie screen, and here's my movie class, like fill out my fields. I think it's great for that. You may want to do a very brief 25 words or less what data binding is. Oh yes, so data binding is a class that allows you to define, to reference an object that you have represented in Java, like a data class. Like for example, there would be a class called movie, and it would have a field called title and a field director and a field year. Excuse me. And then you could reference this in this layout, and you could assign to the different text views which field of that class corresponds to it. And then in code, you would literally just say, here's the view, bind this instance of movie to this view, and it would automatically put all the values. It would like fill the title in, it would fill the year in, and the director in. So it takes away all the boilerplate of like, find this view. It's a text, by the way, it's a text view, so cast me. And then, and set this text to it, like, which is like 2 to 3 lines of code, which sometimes you have to do for a bunch of data because you might have like a lot of information you want to show. And so data binding offers you to just do that for you in a way, which is really nice. But it can do a lot of logic as well. It can do things like, if this field is true, show this view or hide this view. It can do date formatting. It's very powerful, and I think sometimes it takes a little bit too much of the logic that should be done in code and that should be visible in code, and puts it into a layout, which a layout should be as plain and as static as can be, simply to just keep the responsibilities divided. And because maybe you want to test some of those things, you should have them in code and be able to test. You can't test you can run a unit test over an XML layer. So yes, use it. I think it's great, but be cautious and like don't overdo it. And it doesn't support all of the UI elements yet. Like for example, for a spinner, you have to write some code to like make it run with a spinner, and then that might overload your data class a little bit. So use with caution, but feel free to use. It's very popular. Like most companies, I think at this point, are using data binding. It's one of the libraries that are like, it's like everybody uses retrofit probably. Everybody uses OK HTTP. Everybody uses data binding. Like these are just part of the curriculum at this point.
Vera, if you'll unshare your screen,
yes.
And we'll go back to screen sharing in case there's another question that needs it. But are there other questions?
So I saw. I
One
just.
more question.
Sorry, can I just in the chat someone says where exactly in developer options. So that it is under monitoring. Whoever was that. Sorry, go ahead, please ask.
I'm not sure I heard correctly, but I wanted to ask, did you mention that with constraint layouts, we're not doing any kind of nested layouts?
Well, the idea is to avoid nested layouts. You technically can. You can put a linear layout or a relative layout inside a constraint layout, and there are probably very valid cases for this, especially if you are reusing a layout and you want to include it into the constraint layout. But I think it was built with the idea that you wouldn't need that. How you use it is always up to you. You can also, you can put you can build a hierarchy just out of constraint layouts, but then I would say you're doing it wrong. Like there's very little point to that.
Okay, so we'll let you, but it's kind of something to be avoided for the most part.
I think the overarching theme is hierarchies, layout hierarchies are hard on the rendering, and therefore we want to have as little as possible of them. That is probably like the general idea, or like the problem that they're trying to solve. So if you have a constrained layout and you can technically lay out everything within it, why would you introduce hierarchy? Right? I think that's the idea. It does work. It's like, it's not going to crash for you or anything. But basically the best practice would be to stay as flat as possible.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just realized that I have to prepare for the next session that starts at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So I'm going to give my very, very, very enthusiastic thanks to Vera Kern for doing this session. We've gotten a lot of good feedback on the feeds that I'm watching on the Slack group. And so thank you everybody for coming. Vera, again, thank you so much. And everybody enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good luck. Oh, I'm on the Slack channel. If anybody has questions, you can ask me.
Thank you, Vera.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.